See, our problem is we're trying to preach. Matter of fact, if I had that sign up behind me, we have a banner I usually carry with me on the road, and it says a revolutionary message for revolutionary Christians. And our problem has been that we are trying to box a revolutionary message into a status quo system. And you can't do it. It's impossible. So at some point, we just have to decide, do we back off, become normal, which is always boring, or do we push on in for revolution, preach the truth, come what may, and just become who God made us? Not made us to be, but made us, and walk in the fullness of it. Now, to do that, all this goes back to what got me on this is the fact that at some point, again, I'll try to say this kind of like I said at the beginning, at some point, you're going to have to make the break with your humanity, and you're going to have to make a connection with your identity with Christ as a son of God who lacks nothing, doesn't even contemplate the possibility of failure or the lack of power or anything else that you need to get the job done, and that you literally walk on this earth as Jesus did. Now, one of the best examples, there's several I could give you, but maybe in the areas of business, because we've already talked about who's here that's been in the military or had been in the military, so maybe the military is always the best illustration. But if maybe you've been in a business, any kind of business, to where you represented your company. Maybe you traveled and you were a sales representative or something along those lines. You had the authority of the company behind you to the degree, I would say, even of the level of your position. In other words, if you were, a sales rep for a city, for a company in your area was a city, then you could do what the company said you could do in that city, or if it was for a state or whatever, whatever level. But even in your area, you had the limit of authority that company basically put you at that point. The bad part is, in the church, we have adopted some of that same thing. That's actually good, but the bad part of that is that we've also adopted the idea that there are levels, whenever the Bible doesn't say anything about levels. In other words, you're either an ambassador of Christ, a representative of Christ, or you're not. Paul made the statement where he said, as though God was beseeching you by us. As though God was beseeching you by us. In other words, when we were begging you to come into this message and begging you to walk into it. I mean, think about that. 2,000 years ago, Paul was begging people to come into the knowledge that Christ in you, the hope of glory. That was his entire message, and he was trying to tell people, please, you got to see this. You've got to see that you have been made one with God, and that God's Spirit abides in you, and that he walks in you and talks in you. The same thing you've been hearing from me, Paul was begging people to step into 2,000 years ago. And people at times did, and other people didn't. Because most people, honestly, don't want the responsibility of it. They want religion. It's easier to have religion and to be told what to do and when to do it. And the bad part is, even when you do that, you're still not sure you're right with God. Because religion never tells you, now you're right. And instead, Paul was trying to get people to move into being sons of God and to see that God has removed the barrier between us and for us to walk into the fullness of it. So even now, we have to make the break from religion, moving into the truth of who we are, so that when we go in, see, if as a representative, and again, this is the hardest part about this, is because from a human viewpoint, we know that if you're a representative, unless you're the owner of the company, you have limits in your authority. Well, God has made you one with him so that he gives you unlimited authority to do whatever his kingdom can do so that you can fully represent it. Because if you, think about this, if you don't have the power and the authority to fully bring the entire power of the kingdom of God into being and into demonstration at any given time, then you are not truly representing the kingdom. You're representing you. Because all the people see is your limits, not the kingdom's limits. Does that make sense? You got that? Because if you can, until you can represent the kingdom fully, meaning that anything that the kingdom of God can do, it can do through you. Until you're there, until you're doing that, you're not truly representing the kingdom of God. There'll be some aspect of the kingdom that's not being seen. Right? You got it? Okay, yes, sir.